Now, let's talk about how to turn the table with terms and using them creatively. Terrific terms can make deals incredible, totally incredible, but almost never do great terms make a bad deal even good, especially if you're in the investor lens, right? Now, if getting really creative terms on a bad deal is the only way that you can get into something and you want to get into something, it can work, but just understand it's hard to make a bad deal great, even with really good terms. I'm going to throw a couple examples out at you to illustrate the point that would be great terms that could make a bad deal amazing, but I've never seen anything close to them in reality. I just want to illustrate the point for everybody that's here. So some terms that you can consider are around timing of the events, specifically earnest money. And there's two things that you can look at there. How do you deposit it and what's the method? You can do from a promissory note, which not many people are going to take, to wiring the earnest money, and you can go from the next day after contract or even the day of contract to usually 3 to 5 days as long as you go. There's some investor structures that will go out further, but we'll stay in the more traditional residential sense. 0 to 3 days is pretty typical. 2 is what happens most often, and it's usually wired or a cashier's check for deposit to the escrow company. And then the escrow company holds it until closing and credits it back. So if you were buying a house for 500,000 and you had $15,000 in earnest money, let's say it was just an all cash deal, so there's not a lot of fees or closing costs or anything like that that you have to worry about. $500,000 purchase, 15,000 in earnest money means when you go to close, you got to bring another $485,000. If you run into problems, as we've talked about previously in the contingency stuff, if you run into problems, you may lose that $15,000, but at least it's still an escrow. You have a chance to fight, to dispute if you don't feel like you forfeited or you didn't perform and the seller's trying to say you did. When the money's at escrow, you can still try to fight about it and push back, which ties into the next bullet point, releasing it to them. That is a strategy that can be used. It was often an investor-based strategy, but it's made its way into the retail typical markets now. It can be very risky. Once the earnest money's in their bank account, it's way harder to get it back. Way harder to get it back. While I do have clients I will do this with, I generally advise against it. And I have a lot of language that I use to try to protect the clients in those situations, which I can't get into here just due to time and probably not wanting to play an attorney on the internet. I have had an attorney review the language that I use, but releasing it to them can be very risky, but it can be very powerful, right? If I'm buying a house and I tell the seller, hey, I'm going to give you $50,000 tomorrow because that's how confident I am, it still goes through escrow. I'll deposit it to escrow, and escrow will give it to the sellers to track the record of it through the deal. But it can help me win the deal. It's a great way to win deals because of price, but there is some risk involved in that process. The timing of the payment of the cash is another way to use terms to your advantage. Do they want to do a big lump sum payment and get it really fast? Do they want to do small sums over extended periods? It's pretty rare in fast moving markets that they want to do that, but sometimes you will run into sellers who have tax considerations that they want to navigate around. So they might want to close in 2 different tax years. I've done some structured closes like in December where we've closed on half of the property, or the sellers got half the proceeds this year. And then in January, they got the other half of the proceeds so they could spread their tax rate on the proceeds of the sale over 2 tax years, which saves them money. That's another way that I can try to work on terms instead of price. I told you I hate winning deals because of price. Sometimes it is the only tool that can be used. For me, it's a tool of last resort. Sadly, for a lot of agents, it's the only tool they know how to use. You can get into things like more creative stuff like seller carried or novations or lease options. The trick with those and breaking those payments out over that length of time is a lot of agents hate those kind of transactions, and they're going to really try to shut them down because they don't understand them. They don't know what to do. So they're worried they're going to look silly in front of their clients. And they're also afraid they're not going to get paid as soon as you say those things. Because if you want to go that way, probably you don't have enough money to pay their commission up front or give the seller enough of a down payment. So they may not present your offer with the zeal that they could. You can get creative on the timing of closing and of possession because they're not the same thing. When you close on the property and take legal title, you may or may not get access to and sole possession of the property. A lot of sellers right now want to do post possession because they want to sell their house and get the money to be able to go shop and buy the new house. And what they want the buyers to do is give them 15, 30, 60, 90 days to stay in the house once they have the money. Well, you want to be aware of that because if you're buying a house and you're going to have I'll keep it simple, a $3,000 mortgage, 3,300 bucks a month mortgage, they want to stay for 3 months. Well, that's $10,000 in mortgage payments that you're making that you're not getting to enjoy the property. So maybe if time is important to them and time post possession, well, there's a couple ways you can structure that up. The post possession is my least favorite. I try to stay away from that. But if they want post possession, then maybe you say, hey, I want to offer you a little bit less so that my total cost on the property is X instead of Y. Do they want to go fast or slow? Some sellers like to go slow. Investors often, I believe, mess this up because they just talk to everybody about fast closings when not everybody wants to go fast. Sometimes they just want the security to know that they can go. So there's things you can do around that, right? Hey, I really want to. A lot of flippers, short-term investors should keep in mind the timing of the closing and what's going to happen because there are some less than optimal times to be trying to sell a property. So it might be worth giving the seller a little more time, even if you're paying a little more money, so that you are not getting stuck with a finished project at a time that is hard to sell and getting exposed on the market longer than you want to be, or having to sit and carry a property for more time than you would like to. And so this is the kind of crazy example that I talked about earlier. Would you pay $1 million for a house that's worth 800,000? And let's say it's not even anything fancy. It's not anything that has you really excited about moving in. Would you be willing to pay 25% more than they're asking for a house that has nothing fancy about it? Most people would say no. Like, I must be crazy. Why would I do that? I would never overpay. But now let's add an extreme term example to that. What if you only had to pay $1 a month? So you buy the house for $1 million and take title and pay them off for $1 a month for 1 million months. Now, granted, that's way outside of anybody's lifespan, and that's where I said it's a ridiculous example. But if you only had to pay them $1 and you didn't have to get a mortgage and you didn't have to go do all the other stuff and you got to control the asset and get all the appreciation or maybe use some cash to improve the value and do all that, it's probably worth something to you to be able to live in a house for $1 a month. So you may be willing to pay a premium. Maybe it's not 200,000, but it might be something. And this is a way that you can use terms to your advantage. We have another client right now who is looking to buy a waterfront property, and they have some pretty unique requirements. And one came available, was a little outside of their price range, but they tried to go after it anyways. They were in a competitive offer situation and didn't end up getting it, but their structure was really great. It's one I've used successfully a few times where they had to offer under the asking price for the house, but they wanted to do a seller carry deal where the seller basically becomes the bank for them and they pay the seller the interest, which got the seller to a higher number than they were originally thinking. And the seller didn't have to have the cash right now. So it could have been a really great deal for them. The bad part is we got caught with another offer coming in while they were looking at ours that was able to close faster. It was less money than our total value, but it was more money than our initial offer without taking all the interest to term. But that can be an effective strategy to work for you.